day, everyone. My name is Rebecca Lilly for the International Association for Energy Economics. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to today's webinar entitled Securitization Challenges and Decarbonization Opportunities for the EU Gas Market. We're grateful to our moderator, Mariana Liacopolo, and distinguished speakers for today's timely discussion. First, a little bit about the International Association for Energy Economics. We are the largest association specializing in the field of energy economics and provide a forum for the exchange of ideas, experience, and issues among professionals interested in the field. The organization produces 2 professional journals, a newsletter, and holds conferences and virtual presentations along with a host of other products and services you can find at our website, www.iaee.org. If you're not already a member of the association, we welcome you to join. A few housekeeping matters in regard to today's webinar before I hand things over to our moderator. First, this webinar is being recorded for those that cannot participate in today's live event. If you have questions for the panelists, please click the Q&A button at the bottom of the Zoom window and type your question. We've allocated time at the end of the webinar to read and answer them. And now I would like to introduce you to our moderator, Mariana Liacopolo, Markets and Policy Associate working in the EU Liaison Office of the European Federation of Energy Transfers. Mariana, over to you.
Thanks, Rebecca. So it's the European Federation of Energy Traders. Thank you very much. So it's an honor and a pleasure to be moderating distinguished fellow panelists and dear friends. The aim of this webinar is to try to address the revision of the EU gas supply security architecture under extraordinary circumstances for the EU gas market, and at the same time to address decarbonization challenges facing an internal gas market under transformation already from before the current extraordinary circumstances. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce my fellow panelists to you and give them the floor for our respective presentations. So I would like to start with Anne Othman, who currently teaches at Sciences Po in Paris, but with substantial experience in DG Energy at European Commission and the representation in France of the European Commission before that. Then Lenka Kovachowska, currently independent consultant for energy and managing partner of International Public Affairs Academy in the Czech Republic, but prior to that, executive director of the Czech Gas Association and deputy energy minister of the Czech Republic. Leonie Reins, professor of public law and sustainability. Leonie, feel free to jump in. Tilburg Law School. Still.
Erasmus University, Rotterdam. No worries.
Congrats on your new job. And last, but by no means least, Ivana Čekovič. Ivana is professor of applied studies at the Western Serbia Academy of Applied Studies, a research associate at the University of Belgrade Fuel and Combustion Laboratory team of the Faculty of Mechanical Engineering, and head of communications at the Water Science Policy, FU, Ivana. So with no further ado, I would like to start by giving the floor to Leonie for her presentation. And in the meantime, we encourage you to leave your questions in the chat, and we will try to address as many as we can towards the last 10 minutes of the webinar. So Leonie, over to you.
Thank you very much. And I assume that you can already see my slides. So without further ado, I would like to make this interesting for the academics in the audience, and I will give a more theoretical lens through which we will analyze today's important practical challenges and opportunities as Mariana kindly described. So this is the lens of sustainable energy democracy. Before going into the practical examples, I will just briefly explain you what sustainable energy democracy means as a concept and what it means specifically for the lawyers in the field. The concept of sustainable energy democracy emerged, first of all, in the context of a clean energy transition and decentralization as an element of that transition. And its early uses have been dated back to the years of 2010, when it was mostly used by non-governmental organizations in various policy and non-scientific papers. So it's actually not surprising that some publications on the topic bear the hallmark of manifestos rather than thorough academic analysis. However, it has entered the academic discourse since a couple of years, and the first concrete reference to the concept can be found in the years 2010, 2011, particularly actually in Germany and Denmark, but the origins of the concept reach back to some 40 years. So the concept of sustainable energy democracy raises a number of questions in the areas of social science as such, mostly actually in science and technology studies, but also for law, namely on the function, role, and legal nature of the principle. So what is sustainable energy democracy, and how did it come from an ambiguous buzzword to a legal objective? So there's still no well-established definition, let alone a legally binding one, and it's used in various different contexts and different meanings. It has been described as a concept, a tool, an idea, a theory, a principle, and an objective. With that, it actually remains that there's a risk that it's still nothing more than a buzzword, something fancy that we use, but it actually has two fundamental aspects that form the core of the idea. First of all, a clean, decentralized energy system on the one hand, so the sustainability aspect, and then the fair distribution of burdens and benefits of the energy sector on the other, so the more democracy aspect. So what does it mean for law, and what is the legal characterization of the concept? So this is actually where the triers comes into play, and we lawyers depart from the perspective that there are three types of norms. First of all, rules, principles, and then objective. A rule in this aspect is setting forth a precise solution for a specific fact. And once the condition of application have been fulfilled, it leads to a clear legal solution. A principle, by contrast, is providing more general orientation and direction for rules. Principles are thus a bit more abstract than rules and are guiding policy measures, but their concrete implementation can only be done by rules. And due to this different nature, principles allow for more discretion than rules. And this duality is then enriched by a third category, namely objectives. Objectives are even more abstract than principles and provide general orientation for the decision maker, and they often cannot be regarded as fulfilled or unfulfilled in the same way as rules. So actually, let's take environmental law in the European Union as an example. Here, this is the Treaty of the Functioning of the Union. So the lawyers will shoot me now, but you could say it's the Constitution of the European Union. And there you can clearly see that the Union policy on the environment shall contribute to the following objectives: clean, preserving, protecting, and improving the quality of the environment, protecting human health, the prudent and rational utilization of resources, and some other objectives. And to enhance this level of environmental protection, in the first paragraph and the second paragraph, it clearly says that the environmental law should apply some principles, such as the precautionary principle, and that the polluter should pay. So these principles are there, and then a rule would be a provision in an environmental act, for instance, in the REACH regulation, where it says that if there's no data to prove that a certain chemical is safe, there's no market, so you can't bring your product on the market. So in this sense, rules, principles, and objectives overlap, and there are three different methods to regulate the same subject matter. So when we come back to sustainable energy democracy, we actually suggest that this should be viewed as an objective, and we propose the principle of sustainable development as the main principle for this purpose. Sustainable development has already a clear foundation in the European treaties, such as in Article 3 of the Treaty on the European Union or Article 11 on the Treaty of the Functioning of the European Union. And in this regard, energy rules should aim to reconcile interests of social economic development with environmental protection needs. Now we can actually even go a step further and look at Article 194 of the treaty, which already includes some specific aims in the energy aspect in this regard. And there it says that the Union energy policy shall aim at the functioning of the energy market, security of supply of the Union, and also to promote energy efficiency and renewable forms of energy. And this all in the spirit of solidarity. And these notions of solidarity and the need to preserve and improve the environment, and enhance energy supply security, and also promote renewable energy forces are especially important in today's context. So I will leave it at this with the more conceptual view of the talk, and will pass on to Anne, who will divide and delve into these challenges from a more practical angle. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Leonie. Anne, over to you.
Okay, so I will give a sort of overview of the EU risk preparedness from the early warnings nearly 20 years ago to the present crisis. First point, I think, which is important, is that security of supply has become an EU issue only from the moment we started to have a gas market, an EU gas market, and it became more and more so with the progressive integration of that market.
Anne, I'm sorry to interrupt. We cannot see your slides yet.
I was about to interrupt you. If you have screen sharing issues, perhaps we should ask Rebecca to take over.
Yeah, because I see my slides. Okay.
Rebecca, would it perhaps possible for you to help us out on this one?
One moment, I'm pulling them up.
Thank you very much.
It's strange because I've done exactly what I've done a few minutes ago and it worked.
One moment,
We're not very well educated after how many years of COVID? 3 already.
Okay.
I should have gone it. I should have taken it there. Okay, partager. Okay.
And I'll be happy to share if you would prefer.
And perhaps we should just pass it on to Rebecca.
Yeah.
Okay, let me take over. One moment. Okay. Is this good? Is this all right?
And we can see the slides now, so you can continue.
And we can see your screen.
Okay.
We can see your slides, so you can start.
Okay. Okay. So I was saying that that security of supply became an EU issue with the progressive integration of the gas market. Then the 2014 Eastern enlargement, following the fall of the Soviet Union, brought in the European Union several member states that were not connected to the EU gas market and that were 100% dependent on Russian gas. And it became clear that Russia was using gas as a political weapon. We had several wake-up calls, as the Commission called them, with the Ukrainian-Russia gas crisis. And then a third parallel evolution is the fact that the EU became more and more dependent for its gas supply. First of all, because EU gas production diminished very fast, while the consumption remained globally stable, and imports doubled over the last 30 years, with Russia becoming the main provider of gas for the EU. And hence, the EU actually did prepare for the risk of disruption of gas supply, and progressively over the years reinforced its framework. And I cannot, and here is a sort of overall picture of this evolution of the EU legal framework, starting in 2004 with a very first and very weak set of rules at EU level on security of gas supply with a directive. Then with the Russian-Ukrainian disputes, this framework was reinforced, the directive became regulation, and we had also a decision to have more transparency on intergovernmental agreements. The annexion of Crimea led to the EU performing stress tests. One of the scenarios in those tests was a complete cut of Russian gas for a whole month. And the EU adopted a strategy on security of supply. And then with the continuing tensions with Russia and Ukraine and the Paris Agreement, the EU adopted the Energy Union, whose main function was to reinforce the synergies between sustainability objective and affordability objective and security. It adopted strategies to increase the supply of LNG, increase its storage capacities, and reduce fossil fuels in heating and cooling, and then once again reinforce the existing regulation and the intergovernmental agreement decision. So where were we with all this legal framework before the crisis hit the EU? Well, first of all, we had a more integrated and better functioning EU gas market, but which is still today an unfinished work. We have a very liquid market in the northwestern part of the EU, less so in the central east and mainly southeastern part of the EU. We also have a better system of infrastructures at EU level, thanks to the regulation on guidelines on trans-European networks that allows definition of projects of common interests, and that also allows the EU funding of these projects through the Connecting Europe facilities, which now has about 6 billion as a budget. These infrastructures, first of all, connect the different national markets among themselves with more interconnectors, and a compulsory reverse flows since the last security of supply regulation. These infrastructures also connect the EU with its external suppliers, with more LNG terminals and pipelines linking with third countries, the latest one with Azerbaijan, and more storage capacities. We have a clear division of responsibilities between gas undertakings, member states, and the EU. Yes, I don't know why this thing is not working. It should go. Okay, we have better coordination and cooperation between the regions and the actors. We have more transparency, a system of declaration in 3 levels, early warning when there is information that something could happen that threatens the supply in the EU, an alert level when there is a significant supply problems and the markets cannot cope with that problem, and a third level of emergency when the situation is such that the market cannot cope anymore to supply the protected consumers. Then we have arrangements for risk preparedness, where member states must perform risk assessments using N-1 infrastructure standard, meaning that they have to check what happens in case of the disruption of the single largest gas infrastructure, and the remaining infrastructure must be able to cope with demand during a day of exceptionally high demand that occurs once every 20 years. We have a system which also includes a supply standard for protected consumers. These protected consumers must be supplied even in different exceptional scenarios. And national and regional preventive action plan and emergency plans must be prepared by member states. Then there is also very important solidarity mechanism in the event of an extreme gas crisis.
Excuse me, Anne, your paper is right in front of your microphone and it's making a very loud noise.
So
There we go.
Yes, and then we have a more developed EU energy and climate diplomacy, and in synergy with the climate objectives, we've made efforts, not always successful, to moderate demand and increase domestic energy productions, mainly through renewables. Now, we could say that the EU is actually much better off, but clearly, to me, still by far not ready enough for the present crisis, and there are many reasons for that. First of all, I think nobody could anticipate the size of this crisis, which has been named sort of perfect storm. There are, as usual, gaps between theory and practice. For example, solidarity mechanisms are there on paper in the law, but they're not easy politically to implement. The compensation mechanism also needs to be better defined. Some initiatives meet the problems of not in my backyard, so there are all sorts of practical obstacles. Then, more importantly, on certain issues, there is no EU framework or a very weak EU framework. For example, member states have exclusive competence to choose their supplier. There is no EU obligation on storage in terms of volume, like there is for the oil since 1969. There's no obligation either on the property of storage capacity. There still are obstacles for the injection of alternative gases in the gas network, and very weak provisions on cyber security. And then maybe most importantly, I think there is an implementation gap. I would say that implementation by member states largely falls short of their initial intents and commitments. For example, on the infrastructure, on the diversification of engagements, on permitting of renewable projects, and member states are rather shy on promoting the moderation of consumption, and then sometimes they just simply disagree on solutions that could improve the EU security of supply. And I think that these gaps also reflect, just to link with Leonie's introduction, they reflect failures in climate and energy democracy. Governments must do better to stick to their engagement and to EU law. They must be better at protecting the general interest on security of supply, on climate, on the right to have access to energy, mainly for the most vulnerable population. they must better control their enterprises. For example, when the sale of some assets could threaten security in the EU, and of course, you know what I'm thinking of, they must provide better information to their citizens and tell them the truth in very clear and pedagogical terms, even when it's difficult. They must mobilize population to facilitate their participation in a sobriety, PV, demand response, and they have to try to facilitate the acceptability of infrastructures and renewable projects which are necessary for the security of EU supply. Then enterprises must do better. They have social and environmental responsibilities, and citizens also have responsibilities to monitor the fulfillment of their government's engagements, to challenge them when they don't deliver, to participate in the energy transition as prosumers or in demand response, to save energy, and to be solidaire. So with all these failures, when the crisis came, the EU reaction covered many fields, and I will not go in detail through the next 3 slides, but they're just there to show you, and I hope you will have access to my slides, because I've compiled a full list of all the measures that have been taken by the EU since the beginning of the crisis. And to remain in my time slot, I will summarize them because I think actors now need to act very fast. And to summarize all this set of actions in a nutshell, they mean that member states and all the actors must now implement all these decisions and policy initiatives, which aim, first of all, to protect vulnerable consumers. There was the EC toolbox of last October. And the key word there is that measures should target the vulnerable consumers in priority. I think I can go on the next slide. Yes. The second set of action is to accelerate the energy transition, both in the short term and in the sort of medium and long term, as a priority to reduce energy consumption. And there is agreement among member states to voluntarily reduce gas consumption by 15% by March 2023. And this reduction may become compulsory if the crisis becomes worse. They must accelerate the deployment of renewables. That means accelerate and facilitate permitting, facilitating power purchasing agreements, double the PV capacities, facilitate access of decarbonized gases to the markets. And third, they must optimize all the existing infrastructure, the use of those infrastructure, and the arrangements that were defined at EU level. That means fill-in storage, and there is an agreement to fill storage to more than 80% by the 1st of November. And at EU level, we're already there, but not yet for all member states. And this measure will be compulsory up to 90% in subsequent years. Member states must update their preventive and emergency plans, and they must prepare the solidarity measures, which will probably be needed. And this diplomacy, energy diplomacy, must be intensified with both producer and transit countries to diversify sources. That means increase LNG supply. And the EU has set up an energy platform to negotiate joint purchases of gas and hydrogen. And that platform must be used, which is not always the case now, with many member states preferring still bilateral agreements. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Anne. Lenka?
Let me share my screen. Can you see the slides? I do see them, so hopefully everybody can see them.
Yes.
I will just follow up on one Anne has said, because besides all the other roles that Mariana presented, I'm also co-chairing with the European Commission the CE platform for joint purchases. And my personal experience showed that sometimes the political declarations are much stronger and persistent than the praxis itself and the commercial interests. I prepared a presentation and I shared that should we have this presentation a year ago, definitely the focus would be completely different. And that's why I called it re-securitization of EU energy policy. Should we discuss internal energy markets a year ago and gaseous solutions, we would definitely discuss hydrogen, biomethane, which we will discuss today, but the focus will be much more on it. When I started the presentation, these are the slides that I use for my students, how the world and Europe has changed on the 24th of February this year, when the war started. We've seen already challenges in autumn last year, but all of us energy economists thought that there is a rational explanation for what was going on, that the markets are not manipulated, that they are just tight. And all the solution and explanations we had from the economic technical point of view were absolutely reasonable and trustworthy. Yet what we learned on the 24th of December, February, completely changed the paradigm. And I would say that since then, the weight on decarbonization has been, at least for a while, put on side. First of all, we are now addressing hardcore security, and later on the further slides, we are discussing economics again. To start with the discussion, I think the quote from, my sample. I would like to focus your attention on the tweet of Dmitry Medvedev, which was for me something absolutely shocking, because even during the Cold War, never in the past, energy was officially used as a tool for blackmailing, and basically for the first time, the Russians admitted that natural gas could be used as a source of negotiating tools. This wake-up call was extremely dramatic in all the states, and I would say that especially the biggest economy in Europe had the biggest wake-up call, and more than 35 years of mutual beneficial cooperation and mutual dependency paradigm was torn into pieces. Logically, huge consequences for really disputable pipeline Nord Stream 2, but also many other discussions. Here in the Czech Republic, we are a landlocked country, relatively small one in the middle of Europe, now presiding the EU, lucky for us. Second big energy crisis, second Czech presidency, we tend to have habits out of it. The first Czech presidency was in 2009, where there was the first outage of the Russian gas supplies to Europe. Basically, the government is in a very specific position, because in the Czech Republic, the whole gas sector is fully privatized and liberalized, and we are one of the most open economies in Europe. So whatever the government does, it has to do via subsidies or via legislation, regulation, and ideally trying to find a solution on an EU level, because we are really dependent on open level. What is a miracle that never happened before is that the war started on the 24th of February. Basically, before the war, LNG was something that was only in the ideas, but there was no economic viability for landlocked countries. But already now we have a stake at the Dutch LNG floating FSRU terminal that's supposed to be commissioned tomorrow, with our Prime Minister going to the Netherlands. So something really amazing, all the approvals, everything functioning. Anne has already told you that the Commission has been hyperactive. There have been numerous solutions, both in economic terms, in security terms, and legislations. The majority of them are being implemented under the umbrella of REPowerEU, focusing both on diversification of energy sources, what Anne told you, bilateral talks, EU purchasing platform and so on. Definitely a huge part will be accelerating green energy transition, not only for the purpose of decarbonization, but especially for the purpose of having domestic sources, decreasing our import dependency. And what's extremely important is reduction of demand, not only in gas that we have already approved within less than a week from initiation. That's the biggest progress. Save the gas regulation, less than a week. A miracle of the Czech presidency, but what we will discuss, or the EU will discuss on Friday, even framework for electricity savings. What are the new fears and what are the cures? As said, from the very beginning, everybody had fears coming from energy security. Not only we had to find 155 BCM of new gas, not Russian gas supplies, which is really a quantitative supply crisis, because all the analysis of NSOG and other bodies showed that less than 50 or 60 BCM is uncommitted. The second major issue is, if we get the gas to Europe, how we will redistribute it effectively with existing infrastructural bottlenecks, be it physical infrastructure bottlenecks, but also commercial, like lacking firm capacities, only interruptible capacities available. And the major blow is to Central Eastern region that is definitely landlocked. The other thing is, what we all realized are anti-underground gas storages. There is a logic that once there is insufficient underground gas storage filling levels, the markets get nervous. And what we've seen all and realized that Gazprom has been playing and speculating on not filling the gas storages, both to destabilize the market, but also to prevent us preparation for the upcoming heating season. With the growing with the time, what we've seen is that we don't have the scarcity and nervousness only on the gas markets, but we've been really witnessing scarcity, secondary impacts on electricity market and huge scarcity there, not only because of the gas, that is the closing power plants, but because of French nuclear power plants outages. More than 60% of the fleet is out. Thanks to the historic drought phase, we are not able to transport coal via ships into power plants, and also hydropower plants cannot work operationally fully. So there is a huge secondary scarcity on electricity markets. And basically the other issue is with this nervousness, the traders have huge problems. I have the slides on economics on next slide because of the liquidity and margining requirements. But what we see is already now, especially in this part of Europe, that big consumers cannot find new suppliers for big volumes, no long-term contracts available because of the margining. What were the medicines, the principles? Anne has already told you about EU platform for joint purchases and bilateral negotiations. Here, EU has a relatively weak position from a legal point of view. It has to be, in the end, the states that sign the contracts or the companies themselves. Then there is a huge wave of investments and really speedy approval processes of LNGs and FSRUs. For the CE region, definitely those ones that are located in Germany are extremely important. What is important are definitely voluntary, or in case of deteriorating situation, mandatory savings obligation to shave off the peaks of demand. We've approved, as the European Union, mandatory filling quotas for underground gas storages. What was extremely important, and especially here in the Czech Republic, as I said, we own nothing. So we had to invite tools how to incentivize the traders to store the gas under current prices and a negative winter-summer spread. And basically the state had to implement specific auctions for energy traders to store gas and compensate them for these potential losses. But thanks to that, there is an obligation not to use this gas before the heating seasons, even should the market situation be attractive for selling the gas. And what was extremely important and enabled also from the European legislation was the use it or lose it principle. So far, it's used only for underground gas storages, which means if you have a booked capacity, but you do not store gas in the capacity, you lose it and commercial other businesses can't use it. Logically, this should be implemented also for the infrastructure contracts so that the gas can flow even with the permanent bookings from Gazprom and shippers. Substitution to energy carriers, including other fossil fuels like coal, oils, and so on, are supported. And what we see is a huge wave of state interference and probably creation of state-owned suppliers that would provide some solidarity safety measures that would not be attractive for traditional market players. From security or resecuritization, we are moving back to economization because what we've seen is, and I've already touched it, we face huge capital exposure of traders because of the margining requirements, and there definitely needs to be a pan-European solutions. Otherwise, the market would be even tighter. There are billions of euros on the bank accounts that cannot be used because of the margining, and unless the situation changes, either really loans or changing really the conditions, there will be no incentives from the traders to participate and to give a forward contract. Gas prices are triggering definitely EU industrial competitiveness. We already see first bankruptcies and closures of the companies. The statistics show that here in the Czech Republic, more than half of the big industrial factories would dismiss people because of uncompetitiveness. And what we see is definitely that thanks to high gas prices and the shortage on the market, we see huge electricity prices that are already causing riots in the streets and really distress with politicians. And what we see is also a hyperinflation that's translating into our lives. All this urges governments, no matter what their political stances, to act and to act fast and decisive. Sometimes individual national solutions are being introduced faster than the EU, because by at least some part of politicians, EU is being perceived as part of the of being co-blamed. So there is a huge pressure on the politicians. There is definitely not a single bullet solution or the good solutions. Before we started, we discussed that basically we are searching the least bad solutions from all the solutions that we have on the market. The Friday Energy Council, Extraordinary Energy Council, is going to discuss numerous proposals. Every day there are new and new non-papers being circulated or leaked into the media. A top priority is de facto decoupling of gas and electricity prices, and there are numerous ways how to do it, either introducing gas price caps, be it on the imports or on the overall traded gas, be it regulated wholesale or retail prices. Also a solution that from my point of view might have the least negative effects both on domestic budgets, governmental budgets, and on the actual functioning and future restoration of the market, that is the revenue caps on inframarginal power plants. Commission has today announced that they would like to really discuss price caps on Russian or even non-Russian gas imports to Europe. We see discussions about implementing again single buyer concepts, these being a final supplier to, for example, critical infrastructure, protected customers, and so on. So everything this is on the table. So definitely that I'm not the situation is really worse. These are just few of the pictures from Sunday protests.
Sorry, this is Mariana. Just for the sake of time, you are approaching your conclusions, aren't you?
Yes, this is the last one. You see that these protests are extremely heavy, a combination of far right and far left, everybody focusing on energy prices, regulations, even more maybe revision of European and Czech political orientation. So to conclude my slides, definitely genie is out of the bottle, and there will be discussions about changing the market patterns. Economies are collapsing and citizens are panicking. It's not overestimation that political stability, democracy, and pro-EU sentiments are at stake, and that's why the governments simply have to find a solution. It has to be found really fast. But we should not find a solution that will really ruin the market that we have built for more than 20 years, because this is, I think, something where we are heading, at least from the media point of view. And sorry for speaking that long. It's your turn.
No worries, no worries. Just you know, for the sake of time and to ensure that we could maybe address a couple of questions towards the end of the webinar, or if Rebecca would like to give us an extra 10 minutes, we'll see. So Rebecca, if you could just go straight to my third slide, please. Okay, thank you very much. So a couple of things from my side. I wouldn't like to repeat things that my distinguished fellow panelists have already referred to, but on a very general note, I would say that the development of market-oriented regulatory incentives for the depoliticization of energy and the promotion, if you like, of market integration has been an ongoing process since the early 90s. So I wouldn't like to focus on the Lisbon Treaty here, or the Treaty on the Functioning of the European Union, more concretely Article 194. But where I would like to start from would maybe be the 2014 Energy Security Strategy and the subsequent revisions of EU legislation, security of gas and electricity supply between 2014 and 2019, that basically should be viewed as closely related to other EU objectives, including the promotion of low carbon and renewable energy sources to decarbonize the economy and meet the Paris Agreement goals. So in this context, particularly, I would say after the adoption of the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, but also as part of the outcome of Madrid forums beyond that, already from 2017, we have this, the concept of sector coupling emerging as a pillar of energy system integration, which basically relates to the deeper integration of the electricity and gas sectors via market design changes and enable regulation. So a very simple example. You have gas and existing gas infrastructure that could be a better vehicle to move energy over long distances and to store energy over longer periods of time than what is currently economically feasible with electricity. And now if you could move to the next slide, Rebecca, please. Thank you very much. So it's emergence of biomethane and hydrogen, including electrolyzed hydrogen, as alternatives to natural gas in applications also falls under sector coupling, as it offers longer horizon perspective to gas and gas infrastructure. And it's by means of this insourcing characteristic of res and low carbon gases in the context of a less concentrated energy system and theoretically an energy system less prone to supply disruptions, that the European Union basically aspires to challenge the conventional energy security motive, which traditionally evolves around adequate and reliable supplies at reasonable prices, with always politically or economically motivated regional conflict as underlying disruption factors. For this reason, you see here the targets. We were at that stage even before the current extraordinary circumstances in the market. which now begs the need for further progress to be noted in this respect. And now if you could move to the next slide, please, Rebecca. Thank you. So given uncertainty over the speed of technological developments, it's, I think, important to briefly sort out the patchwork and precise timings of regulatory decisions to phase over from natural gas to hydrogen and to enable larger scale direct injection into the natural gas grid of hydrogen and of the standardized specification of biogas after purification, or of biomethane as the output of thermal gasification as per the definitions of Article 1, Paragraph 2 of the existing gas directive. So regarding definitions, and on the basis that if you inject hydrogen into the natural gas network, it becomes natural gas by definition, we have the definition in the Commission proposal for revision of the gas directive of low carbon hydrogen and low carbon gases more broadly, provided a greenhouse gas emission reduction threshold of 70%, presumably referring to the unabated fossil equivalent. Here it's unclear if decarbonized biomethane can be deemed as renewable or low carbon, and the development of an exact methodology to assess emissions for low carbon hydrogen will be developed through a delegated act to be adopted by end of 2024. So here you have delay on clarity with definitions, which will be unhelpful for investors under current circumstances when you really want the hardware in place for a traded market to kickstart. And at the same time, the reference to RED II, the revised Renewable Energy Directive under the Clean Energy Package, we have the reference to RED II in the hydrogen and gas markets decarbonization package for the definition of renewable hydrogen, or else renewable fuel of non-biological origin labeled as such, provided it saves 70% greenhouse gases compared to the use of the fossil fuel comparator. So that alludes to another pair of delegated acts on additionality of renewable electricity and greenhouse gas methodology, initially intended for RFNBO use in the transport sector and then for all end uses. So to create certainty in a future market for renewable attributes of hydrogen, hydrogen producers should ideally be able to top up, if you like, their output by reference to the Greenhouse Gas Savings Delegated Act, even if they mostly produce hydrogen, which qualifies as renewable under the Additionality Delegated Act. And finally, challenges around storage. Taxonomy has to be considered, as hydrogen, for example, in a depleted field connected to the hydrogen grid would not reach the 70% purity criterion for a number of years, as it would commingle with cushion gas. Now, regarding incentives, we have Article 16 of the proposed regulation introducing the conditionality of the tariff discount trigger at interconnection points, subject to registration of transactions in gaseous fuels in the union database. However, a clear area of concern here is if you're going to create cross-subsidization, where do you really recover the missing revenues from? So if extra support is needed for a market in renewable and low carbon gases to kickstart, it should rather come as incentives for production and consumption, such as, for example, contracts for difference, or public funding for network construction. So tariffs are also dependent on separation of tradability. So if we have tradability of whatever certificates are ultimately deemed RED II compliant, either GEO's guarantees of origin with sustainability and greenhouse gas emissions info attached to them, or European Commission recognized proof of sustainability certificates. So if we ensure separate tradability from the underlying commodity, then you don't really need the whole tariff discount thing, as it's kind of the wrong way to incentivize renewables and moves away from cost reflectivity of systems. Now, when it comes to certification, in particular, under Article 8 of the proposed gas directive and Articles 25 to 30 of the soon-to-be revised RED II, we have the temporal issue that should be borne in mind, as gas can also be stored. So to promote liquidity and investment, temporal matching of production and consumption could be relaxed. And more broadly, I would say a better link between the gas package and RED II and its associated implemented and delegated acts will ensure maximum commonality of instruments, irrespective of the end use sector, for a single instrument to ultimately emerge with a tradable value in any market and with the information necessary for this purpose in order for markets to eventually converge. And finally, such an instrument should ideally offer some relief from the obligation to acquire emission allowances. So validation basically of an emitter's acquisition of such certificates should allow for the carbon abatement value of these gases to be recognized under the EU emissions trading system, monitoring and reporting regulation, and that's provided that the interconnected grid, including medium and low pressure pipelines operated by DSOs, is treated as one single mass balancing system, and that off-grid biomethane systems and hydrogen clusters are treated as separate mass balancing systems, and provided that the MRR guidance fully reflects the way that the gas grid is optimized, with biomethane typically redelivered to the closest consumers, so not traveling on a point-to-point basis. So being conscious of time, I will not touch on TPA, unbundling, and integrated infrastructure planning. I will skip straight to my conclusion so that we give a bit of time to Ivana. So if you can go to my last slide, Rebecca, please. Thank you. So to conclude, replacement of fossil fuels is likely to be taken over by more renewable electricity production and biofuels, and that's what's being reflected in REPowerEU already from last March, I would say. Now, there is the seasonality element that's not quite net with renewables production and electricity storage right now, and that's going to be a critical factor of what the fuel mix will be, how it will be delivered, where does it come from, in what form it will be, and whether you can store it or not. So gas is better suited to deliver that, but it's got to be part of the decarbonization, and that's exactly where hydrogen comes in. Now, there are other benefits like the use of existing infrastructure with better adaptation. So when it comes to spot markets, we basically have a hydrogen market that is going to be closely related to natural gas and electricity, and they will all have a requirement for physical balance or optimization. And in this context, energy security will have to be viewed more holistically in a sector coupling context. So even if your natural gas system is empty or not used highly at some point, it may still be providing essential security of supply benefits in electricity. And there is a question around how do you pay for that? Like, should gas users pay for that? And more broadly, learnings from gas, if we want the widest possible number of buyers and sellers to come together, we want virtual trading points, and regulation hence needs to consider intermediation. And that's about moving from a series of bilateral trades between buyers and sellers as purely bilateral transactions. And this is also relevant, again, to the role of certificates and how we must make sure that they don't prevent intermediation by dehomogenizing the capacity, which is really fundamental for a traded market. And a very, very last point about liquidity. We are going to see new products and spreads emerging, and the hydrogen price will be based on its relation to all those other products. And that's how we'll begin to see increasing levels of price transparency. And in short, for that, we're going to need well-functioning wholesale markets, non-distorted wholesale markets, free formation of prices, separate environmental characteristics, and ensuring that national support schemes basically don't become a barrier to cross-border trading. Again, being cautious of time, we're running late. I would like to give the floor straight to Eva. And in the meantime, I will be collecting your questions in the chat. And Rebecca, if you can have an extra 15 minutes at this point.
That's no problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariana. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Ivana Cekovic, and before I start, I want to express my sincere gratitude for participating in the webinar together with these extraordinary women and professionals in their field of expertise. I will briefly try to look at the technical side of today's topic and potential technology pathways of gas decarbonization. So I would like to emphasize that accelerating the development and deployment of specific technologies that actually hold significant potential resolve problems that we are talking about, so securitization challenges and the decarbonized EU gas market, will be at the core of tackling climate change effectively at the speed and scale required. For this reason, the clean outline of the different types of renewable gases and hydrogen and their production technology is crucial. Besides, it is very important to highlight the fact that although it is widely accepted that renewable and decarbonized or low carbon hydrogen will need to play a major role in the EU's decarbonized energy market, we should not forget other renewable gases such as biogas, such as biomethane, and such as synthetic natural gas or SNG. First of all, I would like to start briefly with biogas, which is gases biofuel. In practice, we talk about landfill gas, we talk about sewage sludge gas, gases from anaerobic fermentation, as well as biogases from thermal processes. What is important also to say that biogas is principally composed of methane, CH4, and carbon dioxide, CO2. And biogas can be produced from biomass or bio-waste by anaerobic digestion or thermal processes such as pyrolysis or gasification. Besides, when we talk about anaerobic digestion, it is important to actually emphasize that we talk about breaking down biodegradable material, of course, in the absence of oxygen, that is important, with the help of microorganisms. And actually here is the image where actually you can see what is happening. So in practically reactor without oxygen or any oxidizing agent, we have a product of anaerobic digestion, biogas, which can be further on upgraded to biomethane or, for example, used for heat and electricity production. When it comes to thermochemical processes, which actually are pyrolysis, gasification, and combustion, and in this case, we are going to talk only about pyrolysis and gasification. This is actually the image where you can see biomass, which is gasification process within CHP system. This is just an example that I used from my PhD thesis that I have finished 3 years ago. So here you can see that there are different stages of gasification. And pay attention, after drying zone, there is the volatilization zone. And actually pyrolysis is nothing else than the volatilization, which is actually thermal decomposition of biomass at elevated temperatures in the absence of an oxidizing agent. After drying, you can see this is the first phase of gasification. Of course, product of gasification and product of pyrolysis is different. So gasification is more complex process. Next one is gasification. It is highly efficient thermochemical conversion. It's happening in reactor called gasifier. It is happening in the presence of an oxidizing agent. And here you can see practically gasification agents enters into reactor in the oxidation zone. So before it's without it. And of course, what is important to say, there are different mixture of products that are obtained in the gasification process. Today, we'll just briefly focus on gases phase, which is called volatiles. So we have different types of gases products, such as water vapor, such as combustible gases, non-combustible gases, and gases hydrocarbons. Here you can see that we have some hydrogen, we have methane, we have CO2, nitrogen. So gasification is very important. Product of gasification, I'll just go one slide back. So you can see product of gasification is producer gas or so-called syngas. Of course, there is some ash, which is not useful. So we are focusing on producer gas or syngas. This kind of gas has a variety of applications. Of course, it depends on the tailoring of the yield and ratio of these products that are inside. So we talk about mixture of different products in this context, focusing on gaseous products. So this product of gasification could be used on site, could be used, for example, to generate heat and electricity, so-called combined heat and power systems, or CHP. As synthetic fuel, for synthetic fuel production, and of course something that is very attractive these days is their deployment as transportation fuels. And further on, it could be upgraded and injected into natural gas pipeline system and transported to more remote customers. Then we talk about actually biomethane and synthetic natural gas, which are on the next slide. When we talk about biomethane, we talk about purified biogas. So also you were able to see on the image where anaerobic digestion was presented. So this is practically upgrade of the biogas into biomethane. Its quality is very similar to natural gas, which is these days very convenient. Then we talk about blending and injection of it into natural gas grid for the same application as natural gas. And of course, what is also interesting, that biomethane can be used as a transport fuel in different vehicles, those that are on CNG or LNG. And on the other hand, we have synthetic natural gas, which describes a variety of natural gas alternatives. Of course, they're very close to composition and properties of natural gas. Then we come to hydrogen, which is, I would say, maybe the most attractive and promising technology when it comes to low, zero, or negative carbon hydrogen production, and in that context we talk about electrolysis of water using renewable electricity. So we talk about green hydrogen. Of course, we have to mention solar PV, offshore wind, nuclear energy, regional decarbonized power mix. When you talk about, of course, renewable electricity, which is very important in this case. And we talk about the composition of water into hydrogen and oxygen. What, in my opinion, is also very important to emphasize is a role of water in decarbonization. This is also the moment when energy sector and water sector are overlapping. And as you know, in the water sector, there are so many issues these days around the world. So that's also something that we have to carefully think about. Of course, when you talk about hydrogen, we can talk about hydrogen that is produced from methane pyrolysis with CCUS. So here you can see practically reaction, decomposition of methane. More hydrogen we want, yeah, we need to go further on with this reaction. And of course, we talk about hydrogen produced from steam methane reforming, or SMR, with CCUS, where we actually in the first stage have products such as CO and hydrogen, and then this CO again reacts with steam, and we have CO2 and hydrogen as products. Of course, when we say methane, when we say instead of methane natural gas, then we talk about Turkey's hydrogen, the one that is produced from natural gas using pyrolysis. So this is the first one. And when we talk about blue hydrogen, we talk about production from natural gas using steam methane reforming. It's essential to have an objective understanding of the well-to-wheel CO2 content of the hydrogen produced by these different technologies. And as we know, in the focus is clean hydrogen, so renewable hydrogen produced by electrolyzers run with water and renewable electricity. However, there are many technologies capable of producing hydrogen, and that's something we should focus more. And what I would also like to say, although the technological solutions to produce hydrogen exist, we talk about technology readiness level from 1 to 9. The future of hydrogen definitely depends on whether technologies reach commercial maturity, so-called CRL, which also has scaled from 1 to 9. Of course, this is driven by relative performance of competing clean energy sources. Of course, capital costs are very important, consumer preferences, policy decisions actually that we previously talked about. And hopefully together with overlapping of this technological perspective with all the other perspectives that today we presented, hopefully we will relatively soon have solutions to all the challenges that we are facing these days. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Eva. So getting back to the chat in order for us to conclude this webinar. So first of all, our slides will be made available after the webinar on the IAE website. So you will all have access to them, these IAE members. And there is a question that I would maybe like to extend to Anne. To what extent do you think the EU gas market is currently integrated? Do you think the EU gas market is well interconnected? I mean, I can take this.
Yes.
I can take this.
Okay.
Anne, I think
yes.
it's more pertinent to your slides.
Yes, I saw that question. Very good question. I mean, I think that if you look at the latest list of projects of common interest, you immediately see where there are either in existence interconnections, but they're quite obvious. Cyprus and Malta are not linked to the European network. And there are many interconnections, mainly in the Eastern and Southeastern Europe, which need to be enhanced. And it's the case between at the Slovak-Hungarian interconnector. I think the Croatia-Slovenia interconnection is still to be finished. The Bulgaria with Serbia, etc. But I think that this leads also to a sort of broader question about, which maybe is a bit in my talk, which is, do we really have a policy of EU security? And my answer to that would be no, because so far we mainly have a policy of security defined at EU level, but for national security. Just to illustrate this, the standards, for example, the N-1 infrastructure standard is a standard for at national level. It's N-1 at national infrastructure. We don't have, for example, a EU standard, for example, that says N-1 of the biggest supplier of the EU. We don't have an EU regulator that is able to say, that has the competence to say, this project in the member states threatens the EU security. And you see what I mean by this. And in fact, it's very clear in the treaty. And it's very interesting that Leonie, when she read Article 194, she talks about the objective of security of energy supply of the EU, but the treaty does not say of the EU, it says in the EU. And we have to read this with the part of the treaty that says that member states have exclusive competence on their suppliers, in the choice of their suppliers and of their energy mix. And that shows all the difficulty of having a truly European security of supply for the EU.
Thank you, Anne. Lenka, I don't know if you would like to add something to this, unless...
I think that the market is really fully integrated. What we've seen, at least from an economic point of view, when we will see potential bottlenecks and decoupling of the market, will be, should there be really a need for solidarity. Then what we will see is a really that the physical infrastructure is still relatively limited, and there will be definitely congestions and splitting of the market. But with sufficient flows of gas, the market is really functioning and well integrated, I would say, commercial.
Yeah, perhaps to focus on the fact that the liberalization story has been a long one until we end up with multiple entry-exit zones and reverse flows, hubs that we're still trying to get functioning in poorly liberalized areas, notably Southeastern and Central and Eastern Europe, by the finalization of vertical would be south to north and horizontal, that would be east to west gas infrastructure corridors. We have the expansion compared to the past of flexible short-term LNG trading. So maybe to conclude this webinar, maybe when it comes to gas pricing and market design, which was not really pertinent to my presentation or Eva's presentation, I think it's important to keep note of the value of hub-based competition in general, as opposed to oil index LTCs, and the support that it's given to inter-member state price convergence over the past decade or so. And I think that we would all agree with this today. And to conclude using one of Lenka's conclusions, that ideally, we should be building on what we already have, and that is competitive EU-wide markets in commodities, markets in related contracts that are already established, and that's to provide solutions not only to the dilemma of affordability and security of supply, but also to decarbonization, basically. So with that, I would like to give the floor back to Rebecca. I would like to thank Rebecca for the extra time allotted to us. It
was my pleasure. IAEE wishes to thank Mariana and all of the speakers for an outstanding webinar. This webinar will be available, as well as the slides, on IAEE's website for future download. If you're not already a member of IAEE, we encourage you to join by visiting www.iaee.org. We thank you for attending, and I officially close this webinar.